Welcome. Today we are diving deep into a word that everyone, and I mean everyone, uses, celebrates, and, let's be honest, often misunderstands.
Freedom.
Freedom. It's supposed to be the core promise of Western civilization, but the second you try to pin it down, to say what it is instead of just what it feels like.
It gets complicated fast. You realize it's less of a single concept and more of a philosophical battleground, one that stretches back for millennia.
And that's the journey we're going on today. We're tracing the evolution of freedom in Western thought, looking at how the greatest minds have tried to define it, constrain it, and, in some cases, liberate it.
That's a perfect way to frame it. Our deep dive is built around a really powerful philosophical book that meticulously tracks this entire evolution. It starts, as it must, with the classical roots, and then moves all the way through the tough questions posed by the Enlightenment rationalists and later the existentialists.
And our mission here is really to get past the surface-level definitions.
Exactly, to understand the fundamental tensions that are still driving the debate today.
To do that, the approach here is very structured, almost architectural. I was really struck by the use of the Adlerian framework. Maybe you can explain why using a model like the Syntopicon is so helpful for a topic this huge.
Well, it stops us from just getting lost. You could easily just list thinkers chronologically, but that doesn't really give you insight. The Syntopicon approach, which was championed by Mortimer Adler, forces us to look for the perennial questions.
Big, timeless questions.
You're right, it makes us ask, are Plato and Kant actually wrestling with the same core problem, even though they're centuries apart and using totally different language?
I see, so it creates a common ground for comparison.
It ensures historical parity. It demands that every thinker, from Augustine all the way to Hannah Arendt, is measured against a common standard of clarity and critical balance. We're really aiming for insight here, not just a summary.
So we're using this framework to cut straight to the philosophical heart of each era. And before we really jump in, a quick note about how we've put this whole discussion together. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Our goal is to synthesize centuries of really complex thought into a narrative that's accessible. We want to show you the fundamental friction that the book identifies.
Which
Is freedom transcendent, meaning it's based on some higher metaphysical truth, some external structure? Or is it immanent, based purely on human action, on purpose, on self-will, right here in the physical world?
Understanding the tension is the key.
It's the key to the whole thing.
Okay, let's begin this journey where all serious Western philosophical inquiries have to begin. With the Greeks, we're talking roughly 400 BC.
And we have to establish that fundamental tension right away. The book makes it clear that the whole debate hinges on this clash between, as I said, metaphysical accounts, those tied to eternal ideals, the forms, and the teleological accounts.
Teleological meaning purpose-driven.
Exactly. Focused on purpose, virtuous function, and fulfillment within the community, the polis.
And what's so fascinating is that even with these different starting points, you have Plato looking up toward the ideal and Aristotle looking around at the community. They both end up in a very similar place.
They do. They reach a shared consensus. Freedom is not absolute. It can never be absolute.
In fact, to be truly free, you have to accept constraints, which sounds like a paradox to modern ears.
It's the defining feature of classical liberty. For the Greeks, true freedom had to be harmonized with individual virtue on one hand and collective welfare on the other. It was always limited by higher realities. Specifically, truth and justice, the modern idea of just unconstrained choice. They would have seen that not as freedom, but as a kind of slavery, servitude to your own worst impulses.
Okay, let's start with Plato then. He gives us the ultimate transcendent metaphysical framework. How does he define freedom, and why is it so, well, restrictive?
For Plato, freedom it's completely tied to rational inquiry. It's about the soul's difficult climb toward truth. His core thesis is actually stunningly simple, but it's incredibly demanding.
Which is that the highest form of freedom is
acting in accordance with rational necessity. Prioritizing what reason dictates over just following your fleeting impulses or desires.
So if I decide I'm going to skip work and eat a whole bag of chips just because I feel like it, Plato would look at me and say, I'm not free at all.
He'd say you're a slave to your own appetites.
Wow.
Absolutely. He saw the soul as having three parts. Right, you have reason, which is the charioteer, then spirit, your noble emotions, and finally appetite, which is all your base desires. Freedom is only achieved when reason is completely in control, steering the soul toward what is good.
So anytime I give in to an impulse or unexamined anger, I'm actually losing my freedom.
You're losing self-control, and for Plato, that is the definition of losing your freedom.
This connects directly to his famous parable of the cave, which the book really focuses on. The prisoners chained up, believing the shadows are real. They're the definition of unfree.
The cave analogy is perfect for this. It's the best illustration of metaphysical freedom. The chains holding the prisoners aren't iron. They're ignorance.
I see.
True freedom, in the Platonic sense, is that intellectual escape from illusion. It's the rational process of turning away from the flickering shadows of what your senses tell you and ascending toward the light of the forms, toward truth itself.
So freedom isn't the choice to leave the cave.
No. Freedom is the act of knowing the light and then having the self-mastery to act based on that superior knowledge.
But wait a minute. If the philosopher, the one who has seen the sun, now has to act according to this new moral script, where's the agency? Isn't that just obeying a different kind of master?
But that's the genius of the Platonic constraint. The necessity is internal. It's not a king forcing it on you from the outside.
It's my own reason.
It's forced on you by your own perfected reason, which now recognizes the true structure of the good. The necessity of reason becomes the very definition of your highest potential. If you're acting based on ignorance or desire, you are unfree, period. It doesn't matter what your physical situation is or how many choices you think you have.
That's a high bar. Okay, now let's shift to Aristotle. We're moving from that purely metaphysical climb to something more grounded.
A teleological application.
Right.
If Plato is asking, what is the true nature of freedom? Aristotle seems to be asking, what is the purpose of freedom in a human life?
He absolutely brings the discussion down to earth. He looks at freedom's role in enabling virtuous action within the structured community. For him, freedom is less about escaping a metaphysical cave and more about mastering yourself so you can fulfill your inherent purpose.
Our purpose as social and rational animals.
Precisely.
And that ultimate purpose, the telos, is eudaimonia. We always hear this translated as happiness, but the book is very clear that that translation is just too thin. It's far too weak. Eudaimonia is much closer to human flourishing or living well. It's not a feeling. It's the activity of living excellently in accordance with virtue over the course of a whole life.
And freedom is the necessary ingredient for that.
It's the mechanism. Without the freedom to choose your actions, there can't be any virtue. And if there's no virtue, there's no path to eudaimonia.
So how does the polis, the community, fit into this? Is freedom an individual project for Aristotle, or is it a team sport?
It's fundamentally a team sport. He famously said, man is by nature a political animal. Our purpose can only be realized within a community.
So my freedom to act virtuously has to be, what, balanced against the needs of the community?
It has to be bounded by them. Civic liberty is limited by justice and the common good. You are free to act virtuously, but if your action destabilizes the community, say, by hoarding wealth in a way that prevents others from flourishing or by acting purely out of self-interest, that action is not fulfilling your telos. It's a misuse of freedom.
This feels like the crucial distinction, one that maybe we've lost today. The difference between true freedom and mere license.
License being just doing as one pleases.
Exactly.
It's the central distinction of the classical world. License is simply acting on unexamined desires. True freedom, for Aristotle, is a bounded permission. If you act against justice or the common good, you are exercising license, not genuine freedom. That single idea, the mandatory link between individual choice and communal well-being, would dominate philosophy for centuries.
So to wrap up the Greeks, classical freedom is about mastering the self through reason, and it's constrained by these two giant pillars, metaphysical truth for Plato and civic justice for Aristotle. That's a really powerful foundation.
A rigorous one. They absolutely set the benchmark for constraint.
Now let's leap forward several centuries. We're about to see a really dramatic pivot in the conversation. We're leaving the classical world, which was all about rational self-mastery that humans could achieve on their own.
And we're entering the medieval period where the whole discussion suddenly has to make room for the divine, for fate, and most critically, for grace.
It's a seismic shift. The goal is no longer achieving eudaimonia or flourishing in this world.
The goal is achieving salvation in the next. The Greeks were dealing with human potential and natural law. Medieval thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas are now grappling with divine omniscience, with predestination. This completely changes where responsibility lies and what the constraints on freedom even are.
Let's start with Augustine. He introduces a staggering tension right out of the gate. How can God be omniscient knowing everything that'll ever happen, including every choice I'll ever make, And humans still have genuine free will.
It's an incredible philosophical nod.
It sounds like a contradiction. Isn't omniscience just a kinder, gentler word for determinism?
That's the challenge Augustine had to untangle. He argues that God's knowledge of future events doesn't cause those events. God exists outside of time, so he sees all of our choices simultaneously in a single eternal moment.
So he sees the choice, but he doesn't make it for me.
Exactly. Our freedom to choose is real, even if the outcome of that choice is already known to God. He doesn't predetermine your choice. He simply knows the choice you will freely make.
And why is preserving that freedom so important for Augustine's system?
Because human freedom has to be the locus of moral responsibility. If we weren't free to choose, we couldn't be held morally accountable for our sins. We have to be free so that we can be responsible for our actions. Responsibility is the prerequisite for a just system of reward and punishment.
But the book points out this tragic paradox. The very same freedom, the power to choose good over evil, is also the source of all potential evil in the world.
It is. If we weren't free, we couldn't choose to fall from grace.
So freedom is this double-edged sword.
It's the capacity for the highest moral good, but also for radical disobedience. And this leads to the next crucial point that separates Augustine so clearly from Aristotle. Because of humanity's fallen nature, our fundamentally impaired state after original sin, our own individual effort is no longer enough.
So my freedom to act virtuously, which was the entire engine for flourishing in Aristotle's world, is now broken.
Insufficient.
It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. The book really emphasizes this. For Augustine, salvation ultimately depends on divine grace.
Grace?
Grace is a necessary aid from God. It illuminates the will and allows the individual to choose the good effectively. Without grace, our freedom is essentially impotent against our own corrupted nature. It's a profound new constraint. Human freedom is only effective when it's assisted by the divine.
Okay, let's move on to Aquinas. He seems to be the great synthesizer. He takes Aristotle's focus on reason and natural structure and brings it into a dialogue with Augustine's focus on divine structure and free will. He's trying to bridge those two worlds.
Aquinas is the ultimate synthesizer, yes. He managed to provide a very clear, actionable definition of freedom that still preserved the agency of the will. He defined it as the power to act or not to act.
A power that's grounded in our rational minds. Grounded in the rational faculty of the soul, yes. Because we have reason, we can deliberate and choose the means to an end. That's what separates us from non-rational animals.
But, like everyone before him, he immediately puts a limit on that power. It's not just an arbitrary power to do anything, is it?
Absolutely not. For Aquinas, this power to choose is meant to be aligned with natural law, which he saw as humanity's rational participation in God's eternal divine law.
So natural law sets the moral coordinates for our actions.
It's the moral map. And this means Aquinas makes a sharp distinction between mere choice and genuine freedom.
Can you elaborate on that difference? It sounds important.
It's crucial. Mere freedom of choice is just the basic psychological ability to pick option A over option B, eating the chips versus going for a run. But genuine freedom is only realized when those choices harmonize with rational and moral law.
When they lead us toward our ultimate divine end.
Precisely. If you choose to violate moral law, you are exercising choice, yes, but you are moving away from genuine freedom. You're actually enslaving yourself further to sin. Genuine freedom is moral responsibility correctly applied, leading toward fulfillment.
So freedom isn't a blank canvas of possibilities. It's more like a track leading to a specific destination, and the map is determined by reason and the divine order. It's a very sophisticated ethical and legal structure.
It is. The will is the engine, but natural law is the roadmap. And it perfectly sets the stage for the next great philosophical shift, the moment humanity decides to whip up that divine map and try to draw its own.
Before we cross that chasm, though, it feels like a good moment to pause.
I agree. The centuries we've covered asked us to find freedom by looking up, either to the forms or to God's design. The next stage is radically different.
It is, and this is a perfect time for some mindful moments. Remember to check out our YouTube channel. It offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought as we continue this discussion.
Okay, let's get back to the journey.
Let's do it. We've traced freedom from the classical world, constrained by truth, through the medieval period where it was constrained by God and grace. Now we enter the age of the self, the Enlightenment and existentialism, where constraint itself is challenged and the individual takes center stage.
This is the autonomy revolution. It's the pivotal moment in the whole story. The source of moral law shifts radically. It's no longer found in external nature or a divine decree.
It moves inside.
It moves to the internal rational capacity of the human being. The question is no longer, what must I obey to be free? It becomes, what law must I legislate for myself to be truly autonomous?
And the towering figure here is Kant. He takes that idea of self-rule and makes it the very foundation of human dignity. He gives us the term that defines the era: autonomy.
Literally, self-law. Kant argued that true freedom is autonomy. It's the capacity of an individual to create moral law for themselves purely from reason, independent of any external authority, any personal desire, or any potential consequence.
So you're not free because you're following the Ten Commandments or the laws of the state.
No. You are free precisely because you are the rational source of the law you choose to follow.
But that raises a huge question. How do I know that the law I'm creating for myself is actually moral and not just my own self-interest dressed up in fancy philosophical language?
That is the entire function of the categorical imperative. It's Kant's famous moral stress test.
Okay, break that down for us.
Freedom is only realized when the principle, or maxim, for your action can be universalized without creating a contradiction. It embodies a rigorously rational golden rule reciprocity.
So if I legislate a law for myself that I wouldn't want everyone else to follow, or if it involves using another person just as a means to my own end,
then that action is not a product of moral freedom. It's just self-serving determinism driven by your own inclinations. It fails the test.
so the law is self-given, but its content has to be universal. It requires respecting the dignity of every other rational person. That actually sounds like an incredibly demanding form of constraint.
It's the ultimate rational constraint. For Kant, freedom and morality are two sides of the very same coin. You can only be truly free when you act morally, and you can only be truly moral when you act freely.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for anyone trying to square free will with physics. The book talks about Kant's audacious solution to the problem of determinism.
The age-old problem.
Right. If every event in the physical universe is just a product of cause and effect, how can we possibly be free?
Kant's brilliant move was to essentially partition reality into two distinct realms, the phenomenal and the noumenal.
The phenomenal realm is the world we can see and measure.
It's the world we experience through our senses, the world of space, time, and classical mechanics. In this realm, everything is governed by natural necessity and causal determinism. Our physical bodies, our appetites, they're all bound by the laws of physics here.
And the noumenal realm?
The noumenal realm is the world of things in themselves. We can never experience it directly with our senses, but we can access it through pure reason. And this, for Kant, is the realm where human freedom and moral autonomy reside.
That seems a little abstract. Why should someone listening right now care about this split between two realms?
You should care because it's Kant's explanation for our intuitive feeling of moral responsibility. He says that our consciousness of the moral law, that deep down feeling that we ought to do the right thing even when it's against our self-interest, is basically empirical proof that we belong to a realm beyond physical cause and effect.
So our ability to even conceive of a moral choice proves our freedom.
Our capacity to make genuinely moral choices, to act according to duty, proves our freedom in that noumenal realm. It allows freedom to coexist with a physically determined world. We are free because we are capable of being moral legislators.
Okay, so if Kant represents the high watermark of Enlightenment constraint freedom through rigorous universal moral law, then Nietzsche is the explosion that shatters it all.
He is. He challenges every single classical and Christian foundation we've discussed so far.
What allows for such a radical break?
The transition from Kant to Nietzsche is driven by one single catastrophic philosophical event: the proclamation of the death of God.
Right.
If that entire metaphysical structure that propped up natural law for Aquinas, grace for Augustine, and even the idea of a universal rational duty for Kant, if that has collapsed, then what is left to constrain freedom?
Nothing.
Nothing. And Nietzsche's answer to that nothingness is radical. Freedom is no longer about discovering a pre-existing law or obeying a duty. It becomes an existential project of pure creation.
So for Nietzsche, freedom is the individual's power to invent their own meaning, to transcend all external authorities, and to engage in this constant process of self-overcoming.
Exactly. He sees all existing moralities, especially Christian ethics, as what he calls slave moralities. He argues they were born out of resentment.
Resentment. Can you unpack that concept? It seems critical.
It's the engine of unfreedom for Nietzsche. It's a psychological state. An individual who is weak and incapable of acting creatively or powerfully turns that pain inward. They then invent a morality, saying things like humility is a virtue or patience is good, in order to condemn the very qualities they lack, like strength, pride, or self-affirmation.
So it's a morality born from resentment of the strong.
It's a reactive morality that binds everyone to weakness. The truly free person, his ideal Übermensch, overcomes this impulse. They affirm their own powerful values, even if, and especially if, they conflict with conventional morality.
So Nietzschean freedom isn't just about making choices. It's about being the absolute source of your own values.
It's the ultimate philosophical divorce from Kant.
How so?
Kant's freedom is rigorous, it's universal, ethically demanding, and fundamentally concerned with respecting the dignity of others. Nietzsche's freedom is radical, individual, aesthetically demanding, and fundamentally egoistic. It's about affirming one's own will to power.
The journey has gone from serving truth to serving duty.
To now serving the radically autonomous self, the I will, unbounded by anything external.
This whole philosophical evolution is just stunning. Okay, so now that we have these high-altitude metaphysical, moral, and existential views, we have to bring them back down to earth. How do modern thinkers apply, or more importantly, limit these ideas in the public sphere?
Oh, right. We've seen the scope of individual freedom expand dramatically, ending in Nietzsche's radical autonomy. So the modern challenge becomes, how do we manage these powerful, often conflicting definitions of liberty when we all have to actually live together in a society? This brings us to the limiting principles.
And Hannah Arendt offers a really crucial distinction for this modern context. She separates freedom into two different spheres of activity.
She does. First, she identifies philosophical freedom. This is the internal faculty of the will, the voluntas, which she calls the I will. This is the internal freedom that thinkers like Augustine and especially Nietzsche were so focused on.
And the second type is political freedom. What does she mean by that?
Political freedom is something completely different. It's defined specifically as collective action in the public sphere, what she calls the I can.
I can versus I will.
Exactly. This freedom isn't realized through internal thought or self-legislation. It's realized through action, through cooperation and interaction with other people. It is inherently pluralistic because it requires the presence of other free agents. When we act together in public, we bring something new into the world. That act of dialogue and creation is political freedom.
The distinction between the I will and the I can seems to be at the heart of her warning. The book highlights her caution about focusing too much on that internal freedom.
This is Arendt's most profound insight for a modern audience. She warns that an excessive focus on sovereignty, on the internal, unlimited will of the self, which she traces back through Augustine and Nietzsche, can actually breed domination in the political realm.
How so?
If every individual in a society prioritizes their own absolute subjective I will, then cooperation becomes impossible. Politics collapses and we just enter a struggle for domination rather than a project of coexistence.
So for Arendt, true wisdom is in prioritizing the pluralistic cooperation of the I can over the solitary commanding I will.
Precisely. Political freedom requires limits because it demands equality among all the actors. To be truly free in the polis, and here she's echoing Aristotle, you have to accept that your personal freedom is necessarily constrained by the presence and the rights of others.
Okay, let's shift to a more maybe structured, almost legal constraint.
Yeah.
Mortimer Adler brings us back to that necessary limit, but he frames it very specifically in terms of how a society functions. He says liberty is a limited good.
That phrase, limited good, is the absolute linchpin of his political philosophy. Unlike something like air, which could be an unlimited good, liberty, when exercised by lots of people in a society, necessarily impacts the freedom of others. My freedom to swing my arms ends where your nose begins. So Adler argues that freedom must be constrained by justice, which he identifies as the ultimate societal value.
And what's the mechanism? How does justice limit freedom?
Justice provides the essential boundary for political life because it demands equality in treatment and opportunity. Adler asserts that the definition of justice, which is all about egalitarian fairness and ensuring basic human needs are met, is what dictates the legitimate extent of our liberty.
So we can actually test any claim to freedom against that standard. If the common good requires justice, then any action I take in the name of my own liberty that undermines justice must be illegitimate.
That is the ultimate limiting principle. Think about economic freedoms. If my freedom allows me or my corporation to engage in actions that systematically harm others, like widespread pollution or monopolizing a resource so that others can't flourish, then that action, even though I claim it as an act of liberty, fails Adler's test of justice.
It's license, not liberty.
It's license, because the freedom of one is directly undermining the foundational good, which is justice for the many. It sets a firm, quantifiable metric for judging liberty claims in the public square.
Before we wrap up, we should touch on the most intellectually challenging part of the book's framework. The Adlerian epistemic lens it uses to analyze all of these claims, the ladder of knowledge.
Right. We've talked about what all these great thinkers claimed about freedom, but how do we judge the validity of those claims?
This is critical because the framework makes a very controversial move. It categorizes some of the most respected philosophical positions, like those of Plato and Kant, as being in the realm of opinion.
It is meant to be provocative, but also precise. The ladder of knowledge moves up from ignorance through opinion to knowledge, then understanding, and finally, wisdom.
Okay.
Knowledge, in this very specific framework, is defined as empirically verifiable, demonstrable fact. Think scientific truth. Opinion is what lies between knowledge and ignorance. It's a reasoned assertion supported by a compelling argument, but it's ultimately unprovable in a scientific sense.
So, why would Kant's rigorous categorical imperative or Plato's meticulously argued theory of the forms fall under opinion?
Because they both rely on metaphysical assumptions that we can never verify empirically. We can't run an experiment to prove the existence of Kant's noumenal realm. We can't prove the existence of the Platonic forms.
So they aren't just baseless claims.
Not at all. They are strong, justified opinions. But because they can't be proven or disproven by the physical world, they remain in the category of opinion, no matter how influential or logically consistent they are.
That distinction really forces you to think critically. It says that only demonstrable knowledge and the wise ethical application of understanding can ultimately validate these complex liberty claims.
That's the goal. The philosopher's job, in this view, is to try to move those justified opinions into the realm of wisdom by applying them ethically in the world. And the practical test for that application is what the book calls the Golden Rule test.
Let's detail that test because it brings us right back to the reciprocity that Kant demanded.
It does. All claims to freedom must satisfy rational reciprocity. You have to ask two questions. First, would this claim hold if the roles were reversed? If I were on the receiving end of this action, would I rationally accept the law that allows it?
That forces you outside of your own self-interest.
It has to. And second, does this claim promote equal opportunity for flourishing for everyone involved? If a claim to freedom fails this test, if it leads to domination or unjust asymmetry, then it is license, not true liberty.
This entire journey, it really shows that while the definition of freedom has shifted so dramatically, from metaphysical truth to divine law to individual will, the one unifying theme has been the necessity of constraint.
That is the ultimate key takeaway from this book. Our synthesis confirms that philosophical freedom always unites rational self-determination with ethical and civic limits. Whether you're looking at the transcendent ideals of Plato or the purpose-driven fulfillment sought by Aristotle, those classical roots, the idea that freedom must serve a higher purpose than just desire, they persist through every single era.
What really stands out to me is the danger that's inherent in that radical autonomy we saw in the Enlightenment. Liberty, when it's left totally unchecked, the ultimate I will, it doesn't lead to universal flourishing. It leads to Nietzschean chaos or Arendtian domination.
Freedom has to be tethered to something outside the self.
And that seems to be the final unifying insight. Only freedom that is grounded in reason, in reciprocal justice, and in a deep respect for the dignity of others can fulfill the ideal across all these different ages.
The path to true liberty, it seems, is always paved with self-discipline and civic awareness.
That brings us to our final provocative thought, building on this material. We've discussed historical constraints like justice and moral law, but what about today? Consider how contemporary challenges, things like the ethics of autonomous AI or mass data surveillance or our global environmental responsibilities, how these things force us to apply these old concepts in entirely new ways.
These new challenges scale the problem exponentially. When an AI system starts making moral choices, Kant's framework demands we treat it as a rational agent. But how do you apply the golden rule to a machine? How does Arndt's pluralistic cooperation work when we have to cooperate not just with other humans, but with non-human intelligences that shape our lives?
And what about our freedom to consume? How far does our autonomous freedom to consume or pollute extend when the consequences are universal and potentially catastrophic for the entire planet?
These questions demand that we re-examine the Kantian requirement of dignity and the Arendtian necessity of pluralistic cooperation, but on a global or even a digital scale.
Something to ponder as you reflect on this journey through thought and look ahead to the challenges of tomorrow. We hope this deep dive has given you a powerful shortcut to being well-informed on the philosophical evolution of freedom.
Click a link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.